Good to see you all here tonight. I've had two questions come up so far, which I want to address. The first has to do with Facebook, and I do touch on Facebook because it's relevant. However, part of the problem in doing these presentations is what do I leave out? Because there's this huge, immense volume of information that has to come down to 35 minutes, and it's very difficult. So I touch on Facebook, but I promise you, if you would like to have questions at the end, I will do my very best. And no, I do not give investment advice. So I don't know if you should sell your stock or not. I'm not going to do. I'll leave that up to Rick Stein. He's the expert on that. The second is, this is a national security talk, and if you want if you want to hear about personal security, how you protect yourself, then Friday the 13th of April, mark your calendar, Friday the 13th of April is you've been hacked, now what do you do? So that deals only with personal security, so we'll be getting to that. Now, Marcia mentioned that some of these things get scary. I don't think what you're going to see is scary, but I must say that probably the most frequent word I hear after these talks is that, gee, you scared me. And I want to tell you, I do mean to scare you, if I do, because part of the problem we have with security in the country is that people aren't concerned enough to do the things that they need to do to, keep our organization secure and keep us secure. Two things to keep in mind as we go through this tonight. One is more and more of the attacks that we're seeing are going beyond the cybercrime, the Equifaxes and the Yahoo data theft and the personal hacking. They're going beyond that into geopolitical reasons for the hacks. And I'm going to touch on some of those in terms of some of the examples so you can see what I'm talking about. So more and more, cyberspace is an instrument of geopolitical national power. And we see that happening all in all. It happened on our elections, as you well know. Secondly, we are seeing a transition as we go through these attacks from let me get this to work, from the losses of personal data, financial information, to the more sophisticated types of attacks. And here's some of the examples of things that you've seen, recently. And the primary, it's very interesting. There was a conference last week in San Francisco with chief information officers who were charged with securing their company's networks. Now, these were large corporations. And there was it's a huge section in the Wall Street Journal, the CIO network section. And it was fascinating. I picked this up, and this was just as a result of this meeting that these people that just had, who are very knowledgeable, they're the ones that are protecting our data. These are the people that are protected at Equifax. And here's the byline of this article. It says, with cyber attacks increasing, companies are learning just how vulnerable their operations really are. It's kind of like, what have we been talking about? This is the 6th year that we've done this, and we've been talking about companies being vulnerable. They're just learning, and these are the people, these are big companies. These are big companies, okay? This is Levi Strauss. This is Bank of America. Really scary. So at any rate, these things will continue. The trend, as I mentioned, really has to do with larger attacks. This particular one is the Bad Rabbit. I don't know who names these. This is a global ransomware attack that hit hundreds of thousands of computers around the world. And what happens with ransomware, and I'm sure you've heard about it and read about it, is that your system, your computer system, is locked up. You have no access to your data. And I've seen a couple of organizations locally here in the desert who've had this happen to them, and they are out of business until it gets fixed. There's no emails, there's no financial access to information, you can't pay bills, you can't collect money, you cannot contact you don't have no customer contact, you cannot do business until it's fixed. So the Bad Rabbit occurred last year in the summer, and it went for about a week or so, before someone figured how to slow it down. And very, very dangerous. So what you have is you have companies that are out of business for a short period of time until this gets fixed. This is the trend of where things are going. And then most recently, just last Thursday, you may have heard this, the Department of Homeland Security made the announcement, and this is, we kind of knew this was building, but they made it official that the Russians have been inside our power grid fairly thoroughly, all right, and that DHS believes that Russia has the ability, if they would like, to flip the switch. Now, when we have discussions like this, we always talk about, well, would they want to, I always ask, what's their motive? Would they want to cut out our power? And in most cases, the answer to that would be no, because if they were to do that, I mean, that's tantamount to the act of war, and I don't think they would like the response. But just the fact that they have that capability is, it kind of sends tremors through, people's mind. Looking ahead a little bit, the financial industry is so concerned about attacks against our capital markets that they are working what they're, again, another name, the cyber doomsday system. And the purpose of this exercise is the leading investment banks are coming together, they're working with some government agencies. Their purpose is to forestall a major attack on our securities markets. If that happened, even in a small sense, even if that happened, such an attack, there could be panic. People could be panic selling. It could be total economic chaos in the country. And so they are looking ahead, trying to anticipate what they might do if, in fact, this happens. 6 years ago, it was documented that the Russians were into the NASDAQ exchange. They've already been there. We don't know what they were doing. They were in there. There have been intrusions into the New York Stock Exchange, so this is not new, but the securities industry is definitely scared. Now, the Department of Defense is scared because the Department of Defense has obviously responsibility to protect us during war. And to do that, they have to have access to their communications systems, to their networks, to all of their machinery that they use to conduct war. And what they are calling the terabyte of death is a massive attack that would freeze their ability to conduct war. And if we were to get into a conflict, let's say with Russia or China, if we were, and they had this type of attack come in, they could freeze a lot of our ability to respond to them militarily. So take off the table the fact that we're talking electrons. We're talking about the fact that you have ships that don't know where they are, you have planes that can't take off, and you have real serious problems. So the Pentagon has a major, major effort going on, and knowing the Pentagon, it's going to take them a while, to get with this. There it goes. Now, none other than Leon Panetta, former head of CIA, has said that he's concerned that there's going to be a major event, and you can call that a cyber 9/11 or whatever. And he just thinks it's inevitable, just a matter of time. It's like the big earthquake that we have coming here. And so that type of thing, you really just do the best you can to protect yourself and hope that when it happens that you're ready. And it could happen at any time. This is not a national problem, it's a global problem. And the World Economic Forum, which meets each January, I believe, in Davos, Switzerland, and they talk about a lot of high-minded things. One of them is what are the biggest threats facing the world? And they ranked cyber attacks as the number 3 threat to world stability for the next 5 years. And they are really concerned. Part of the reason they're so concerned is that forget the exact number, something a little north of 50% of the worldwide securities exchanges in 2017 reported significant cyber attacks against their markets. And so this is the World Economic Forum way of saying that, look, we really need to pay attention to this because it's serious. Now, how do we get into this fix? So I want to give you an analogy that we can all relate to, and that is this. Probably one of the best achievements of the 20th century was the ability to control the use and, by and large, proliferation of nuclear weapons. And we did that through treaties, agreements, a thing with Russia called MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction, which basically means whoever fires first dies second, And so that we managed to keep nuclear weapons under control. When you get into the cyber world, there are no treaties, there are no agreements, there are no MADs, there is only, it's like the wild, wild west. And so when we have things coming at us, we don't know where they're coming from and what they're going to be doing, but it is a totally new world, and new rules have to be written, and that's what people are working on. This shows you an example of what I'm talking about. This shows the nuclear. I don't think this has a pointer. The nuclear nations in the yellow, and in the green, the cyber nations. Now, the United Nations, where these numbers came from, is United Nations, and they said that as of 2016, the last numbers that they had, that over 32 nations were known to be in possession or developing offensive cyber weapons with which to attack other countries. Now, what this means for us is as follows. We are the world's most powerful military force, without question. We are not the most powerful cyber nation. And you don't have to take my word for it. All you have to do is listen to the news, look at your newspaper, and you see the attacks happen continuously. And so we have given away, I'll give you a couple of reasons. We have given away our leadership, even though we're the ones who invented the internet, and we are the most advanced technological nation on earth, perhaps except Israel, who's very, very strong on this. And yet we are, and this is where the whole question comes down, are we winning or losing the cyber wars? And we are not. The problem is, I wanted to mention, with regard to these nuclear weapons, the cyber weapons, the major countries who have these may not be disposed, China, Russia, to use them to take out the power grid. But many of those weapons are available on the market, the open market. And it's called darknet. It's one of the names that goes by it. So many of these weapons can be acquired, and they can be used by terrorist groups. They can be used by smaller nations. And so all of a sudden, we have a huge proliferation problem. Huge. And as you can see from the prior chart, I'll go back to that, that proliferation problem is getting larger and larger every year. We don't have the control like we did, in the nuclear world. So Michael McCall is the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee in the House of Representatives. He gets, in his position, he gets weekly top security briefings on the state of security overall in the United States of America. And his statement, made this last year, was that in cyber, we are less safe today than we were 5 years ago. What does that mean? It means that the threats from the attackers are going like this, and we're going like this. And that gap is getting larger. Now, what is the reason for that? There's a number of reasons. I'll tell you something that's really significant. If you go back and look at, we've been through about 4 phases of cyber attacks, cyber malfeasance. If you go back to the late 80s, early 90s. It really was the hackers back then, you know, the kids and the pranks and the defacing of sites and, you know, doing it for sport, doing it for bragging rights, that type of thing. And that was an early phase. And toward the end of that phase, as the internet got going, the largest application on the internet at the end of the 1990s was cyber porn. And it was a $2 billion worldwide industry at the end of the 1990s. And the criminal syndicates, primarily Eastern European, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, there's a lot of people that didn't have jobs, they're looking for something to do. Cybercrime is an easy way to make money, you don't have to leave home. And so cyber syndicates formed, and you saw that in the early 2000s, so that the attacks became more serious, they became larger and more frequent. And then the third phase, you got nation states getting involved in that type of thing, where you start to see, like, for example, I'll mention this later, North Korea attacking, if you remember this, Sony Pictures. So they took out Sony Pictures computers, they stole some embarrassing emails and released them, and the latest film that Sony was coming out with, which had to do with the assassination of the North Korean Premier Kim Jong-un, the attackers said to Sony that if you release that film, we can't guarantee the safety of the people who go to see it. And so that's a little bit scary. So that's that type of thing. And then in the fourth phase is state versus state. And that's where we are now. We are nation versus nation. An example of this, and we'll get into it, is Russia, if they in fact did, Russia disrupting our election systems. Is Russia going after the Ukraine government? It is North Korea taking out South Korean banks. That is state-to-state actions. So those actions are the most serious with phase 4. Our defenses, our response, and this is the key point here, are into stage 2. Okay, you see the distinction? So what we do when we have a stage 4 attack, just as when we find out that the Russians have been in our power grid, that we're going to respond with a stage 2 thinking, which is what? It says that we are going to sanction 13 Russians and 5 Russian companies. We're going to sanction you. That's really a deterrent, isn't it? It's a big deterrent. Now, what does that mean? Okay, well, it means that those businessmen they shouldn't leave Russia with their own passport, because when they get off in the south of France, there'll be someone from the Department of Justice waiting for them. So they can travel with fake passports, which is fine. It does mean that their children can't go to Harvard, so that's probably a plus. And then it also means that their wives can only shop, when they come to the United States, can only shop in sanctuary cities. Yeah, that is a joke. Yeah, exactly. So there is the gap. So we've got serious attacks, nation versus nation, and the United States is responding not in kind. The United States is responding with sanctions and taps on the wrist. And we seem to be stuck in that thinking, and it's not serving us well. So let's take a look at who some of these players are that are coming after us, and take a look at what they're using cyber power for. Okay, so if you look at Russia, their geopolitical aim right now, or one of them, is they would like to disrupt NATO, and they would like to disrupt the Western democracies. And so when you get down to the election, we'll talk about it in a minute. That's what's driving them, and they're finding that they can use cyber attacks to do that, because you know why? We're going to respond with sanctions. We're not going to respond with force. We're not going to respond with force. So they've learned. Just like the teenager learns. You say the time to come home is at 10, and they come home at 11, nothing happens. They'll come home at 12 and see if nothing happens. And the Russians are in the same way. And so we're finding that they're pursuing their political aims, knowing that there's not going to be any retribution from the United States of America. And as you all know, I don't have to go into this, there was the campaign hacking of the Republican Democratic parties, primarily the Democratic parties, the DNC, and there were some embarrassing emails stolen and released. So they were hacking in there, if it was the Russian, and they were releasing those. And they were doing it to disrupt the whole belief in our voting system. And then we get into the fake news, and we're starting to get close to the Facebook story here, okay? So you've got news that because of the way that the internet is constructed, you got imagine you've got 3.4 billion people on the same single communication line, same line. And then you have a company like Facebook that has a way of perpetuating communication between many of those people. 2.2 billion of those, actually, is their user base. And so the Russians found that they could do a great job of coming up with disinformation, fake news, bad news, and things that would cause people a lot of anguish, cause divisiveness in the country. And they had an organization called the Internet Research Agency that did a lot of this. Had several hundred people who sat there and did fake tweets, fake Facebook posts, and they also used robots to do it. So they were really into the whole election thing. And this is where Facebook comes in, because what Russia did was they weaponized Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Instagram. They weaponized them. These were tools meant for communications. And so you take, and I'm going to pick on Facebook because everybody else is right now, I'm not the only one, that Facebook has a user community that is larger than Christianity, and they have their product that is co-opted by a foreign power. Now that's a real serious problem. And Mark Zuckerberg can talk that away all he wants. That is a huge problem. Their whole platform got away from them. And we're going to get into questions on this, for sure. And what we're saying is, hey, we were busy taking care of our voting stations and our polling booths and people, and then this comes along. And so the whole point was, we're looking here to protect our voting stations, and the Russians are over here playing havoc with social media. We weren't ready for this. We weren't ready for this. Not that it's a unique idea by any means, but it is made possible in volume because of the way that the social media companies, all of them, are constructed. In fact, The Economist, if you read that, they put out a whole section in one of their issues about social media's threat to democracy. And there's been a lot written on Facebook and what's going to happen to it. I saw something this morning that I thought was interesting that here it is. I'll mention it to you. And I believe this was in the Wall Street Journal. This was an opinion piece, But it says, this gentleman said, if you wanted to create the perfect instrument to undermine confidence in democratic government, the rule of law, respect for empirical evidence, you would design something like Facebook. So much for the stock price. So, we've got real problems that they're facing, and this is, when you hear the term, it's funny, if you watch Homeland, the most recent issue, you got, they said, we have information warfare going on, okay? If you heard him say that. So this is what information warfare is. It's weaponizing information to cause havoc in your enemy's space without doing physical, damage. And of course, the jokesters got involved, and here's a cartoon. This is a peninsula redistricting that's done. Now, if you read it, it says your new district is 40% Democrats, 35% Republicans, and 25% Russian robots. Okay? And so, it's funny. I love cartoons because they really do seem to capture things, very well. So, Putin still maintains they didn't do it. even though all 17 intelligence agencies say they did. So take your pick. And as far as Mark Zuckerberg, as late as 3 o'clock today, he released a statement sometime today, but the last I heard of it, basically he's saying, don't mess with our business model. Okay? In other words, we're going to handle this, you don't mess with it, because he is running scared from regulation. Forget the lawsuits. China. Okay, China has something, anybody ever heard of China 2025? Anybody ever heard of it? Okay. China 2025 has to do with China achieving economic dominance in the advanced technologies of artificial intelligence, robotics, quantum computing, the internet, superiority over the United States, superiority over the rest of the world. This guides the things, what I'm about to show you, this guides the reason they're doing some of these things, what they're doing to us in terms of the hacking. Because China is looking at us as a source of information. They're not really coming in and destroying things. They're gathering information. It's all in support of their objective to be the supreme global power in high technology by 2025, and if they have it right, the supreme military power. Okay? So that's a dangerous objective. If you take The Economist, again, I love their covers. If you take The Economist, this most recent issue has a cover story, The Battle for Digital Supremacy, and it talks all about China 25. If you have that, it will tell you everything you need to know, and it will make sure that you never buy anything from China again. No, really, because they're taking our money to use against us, is essentially what the article is saying. Now, I showed you a version of this last year. This is a newer version. These red dots, this comes from the National Security Agency. These red dots, each one of those, there's about 500 of them, represent Chinese attacks on U.S. government facilities and private corporations for the purpose of stealing information, okay? So, weapons systems, weapons plans, rockets, satellites, military planes, intellectual property from the standpoint of you have a product plan, a product that you're coming out with, you have some new solar technology, here's how you're going to do it, they steal that. You have mergers and acquisition plans, they steal that. And this has been going on for at least 6 years, as long as I've been giving these talks. This has been going on. Now, what is our response to this? Sanctions. Is this starting to sound familiar? It's getting really, really familiar, and it's getting really frustrating for me to watch this. So again, they find that they can create another 500 dots and absolutely nothing will happen. So we are, in a sense, the R&D department for China's 2025 project. Very good. Also, if you work for the government or the military in the past 30 years, you may remember there was a giant reach of the Office of Personnel Management, which is the government HR department. And they took 28 years of personnel records, including top secret information. And if you had a top secret clearance, that very, very long form that you have to fill out with everything you've ever done, they have all of that information. And what was our response? Our response was General James Clapper at the time was the Director of National Intelligence at the White House. General Clapper, distinguished career, is highly respected. His comment was, and I'm going to paraphrase this because I don't have it exactly for you. His comment was, you got to really hand it to the Chinese. I would do the same thing to them if I could. That's our Director of National Intelligence. Okay, now you're starting to get the gist about our response to these things? Okay, they're not real good. All right, so what do we have October? Well, this goes back. This goes back a year and a half. So we have the USS Ronald Reagan was attacked by China. They got into the systems in the ship. And so the ship is, that's a really scary thing. The attackers did not get into the navigation systems, but it could be the next time that they will do so. It scared the Navy enough that the Navy is now, and those of you who've been in the Navy can appreciate this, those who are serving navigation roles on ships from now on are receiving training in navigation by sextant. And the reason is the computers, guidance systems are awesome. I mean, they're great. The problem is there's no backup plan. The plan B doesn't exist. If the guidance system is compromised on our ships in the South China Sea because China wants to cause havoc there, which they do, and which they are, okay? If they want to make our ships blind, they don't know where they are, they don't know how to fire their missiles, they can't defend themselves, they're halfway there. What was our response? We didn't even bother with that. Our response was the sextant. Just like, and I didn't mention this because it's just hilarious, the solution on the, the election problem in terms of, okay, are we having votes changed because we got electronic voting here? The solution on that is we're going to take the states back to paper ballots. So we've got elections going back to paper ballots where they were 20 years ago. We've got the Navy going back to sextants. This is technological progress. It's fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous. This is where we are. So here's the thing. So President Xi says, oh my God, he was confronted by then President Obama. He says, we've been doing that? You know, gambling in the casino? Really? Okay, we'll stop. We'll stop. So in the summer of September of 2015, President Obama, President Xi signed an agreement that China can certainly do espionage. We all do espionage. We're going to spy on their military stuff, but they cannot take our intellectual property. They agreed to that in writing. Now, this so happens, about 2 months after this, I was in some cyber briefings and out of town, and Tom Ridge was there. Now, Tom was the former governor of Pennsylvania, and as you may know, the first Homeland Security secretary, and he's now in the cybersecurity business, Ridge Global. And I asked him at a break, I pulled him aside, and I said, what do you think about this agreement between Russia and China and the US on the intellectual property? He laughed. I mean, he physically laughed. And I said, what's going on? He said, the problem is there's no way to monitor whether they're doing it or not. And if they were doing it, there's no circumstances for us to do anything in terms of reprisal. So it's a joke. And he's a man who would know. So that was our response. Since then, there was a dip in the Chinese red dots, but they are back in force. So all of that is not really going to stop. So that brings us to, who's this? Boy, I tell you, he's familiar. Love that haircut. That's what happens at supercuts if you don't tip them. You know. Boy, so here we are, North Korea. Now, North Korea has a fairly active cyber offensive program, which is interesting because they have very little internet in fact, there is no internet as we know it in North Korea. They do not allow the internet in because people who live there would find out that the rest of the world actually gets food and things like that, electricity. So they have their own intranet. It's just, they listen to their own stuff, kind of like Facebook, same type of thing. And so they do their attacks from a facility in China and Malaysia and Hong Kong are primarily where they do their attacks from. So it's very difficult for us to stop them because they're coming from somewhere else, and we can't really do anything with them. So I'd already talked about the Sony Pictures thing, the fact that they were really engaging in extortion, and it was really scary. The distributors said, we're not going to distribute this film, which was absolutely correct, in my opinion, because you don't want to put people at risk. But it did get released, a limited release. It wasn't a very good movie, so not too much mention. Another thing, whoops. About 18 months ago, North Korea was able to pirate, in the midst of a heist from the New York Fed that would have been about $1 billion, that got stopped by accident. They got away with $81 million from accounts in the New York Fed over the international SWIFT payment network. So they were able to slip right into the Fed and take what they wanted and slip away. And I think you know what our response was. And then last summer, the WannaCry ransomware. All right, we're back to ransomware. This is a global attack that hit over 150 countries, over 300,000 computers. And here we had some serious things happening because you've got ports that are closing. You had the port of LA that had disrupted shipping for nearly a week. You had 1/3 of the UK healthcare system was essentially shut down. They had no access to medical records. They had no access to your latest diagnosis. They didn't know what your drug treatment prescriptions were unless they had it in writing. And of course they don't, everything's electronic. Then FedEx shipments were grounded. It was all because of this ransom that came from North Korea. And they were hoping to collect money from this because they need money because we're sanctioning them. So that was stopped again by accident. There was a researcher in Britain who was looking through the code of this ransomware and he came across something that didn't make sense. And so he says, I think I'm going to try something. And he was able to stop the propagation. But that's North Korea. You can see this is an example of some of the types of things that they're doing. So here's his response. And basically he is not deterred at all about, what we're going to do to him, evidently. So he just, he continues. So where does that leave us? Well, if you go back, this is 1995 Time magazine's interesting cyber war cover that back that long ago, they were covering this type of thing. And here's the quote that was in the bottom. You probably can't read it. The U.S. rushes to turn computers into tomorrow's weapons of destruction, but how vulnerable is the home front? And I think it's fascinating that here we are in 2018, and here this was 1995, and they were already onto this case that yeah, we might be developing cyber weapons, but who's taking care of all of us at home? And they were on top of that. And so they hit it, right on the target. The only thing that's not on the target is this. So what we've learned is that our defenses are not working. In terms of lessons learned, the defenses that we have are not working. And if you look at some of these major breaches that you've seen here, I gave you one reason that these companies are just now learning that it's a serious problem. And we learned, secondly, that other nations are not deterred from from attacking us because we're not going to do anything about it. And so things have to change. Now, here's when we get, and this is a first because one of the things I know people say about this talk in the last 6 years is that, Jim, it's always bad news. How come there's no good news? I wish there were good news. But this year, I actually have a glimmer of hope. I have some good news. And I'll mention a couple of things to you and we'll close. One is in Washington, there's some changing attitudes. And I think a lot of this has to do with the Facebook thing, has to do with the elections, has to do with Russia's meddling. And we find that in Congress, as ineffective as they may be sometimes, that Congress, they are saying, we're fed up, we've had enough of this, we are not going to continue putting up with being the world's punching bag. And we really need our organizations to do something. Okay, so those are just words, but I want to introduce you to two people who you may or may not know who they are, who are going to have a big, big impact on where we go in terms of cyber defense in the future. Who knows who this young lady is? Raise your hand. Not very many. Okay. She is a 46-year-old attorney who is the new Homeland Security Secretary. She has a background in cybersecurity, and Kirsten is a hawk when it comes to going after those who attack us. And she is going around talking to businesses, giving them the right to do something called active defense. Active defense is as follows. What we've been doing is reactive defense. In other words, you attack us and we recover. You attack us and we recover. You take our records, we recover, and wait for the next. That's reactive. She's talking about active defense. What that means is that organizations will be able to, using some of the things that she's going to be providing, are going to be able to take their defense out of their own networks and follow it back to the attackers, to get their data back, to disrupt the attack in process, or perhaps even cause some damage at the other end. Now, this is new thinking. It's totally new thinking. And when I said to you, there's a lot of people that are saying that, we're tired of this, and we're not going to put up with it anymore. It just so happens that Kirsten comes on the scene, came from nowhere. Well, not really nowhere, but she came from Florida, but she came. Yeah, it's like she's not a national name. The number, you didn't look around, but the number of hands that went up of people who knew she was like 4. Not very many. So she has a good background. Obviously, she knows what she's doing. So what the steps that she takes are going to have in big measure, an indication of, are we going to move from the stage 2 sanctions thinking to the stage 4 we're going after you thinking, okay? And she's charged with protecting the homeland, and that's one way that she's going to do that. Now, it just so happens, as Marcia mentioned before, my book, my cyber thriller, my novel is back there, and it is for $20 you can have the book, and that $20 goes to the Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory Foundation for all the good work that they do. So they get all $20, so I encourage you to get a copy. It just so happens that the lead character in my book is Kirsten. Now and that is a coincidence. I didn't know about her before. In the book, it's actually kind of interesting because in the book there is fake news, and there is a conspiracy between the intelligence community and an opposing political party to take down a sitting president. Does that sound familiar? And this is not set in 2018. This is a different year. So it just so happens that it's actually very topical, even though the second edition came out 3 years ago. So at any rate, get a copy. It's a good read. Okay, gentleman number 2. Anybody know who this Army general is? Is that a yes? You're not sure. Okay, basically no one. That's because he came from nowhere. He's not from Florida. Okay, Lieutenant Paul Nakasone has been nominated to be in charge of 2 agencies, the National Security Agency and the U.S. Cyber Command. Now, General Nakasone thinks along the same lines as Kirsten. In other words, he said, I'm tired of being a punching bag. I'm tired of taking it. We are going to make the attackers pay. Okay? And we're going to make them pay until they change their behavior. So, he is going to have a plan within 60 days on his intentions to the White House, and we'll see what this general comes up with, but I like his attitude. This second organization that he runs, the U.S. Cyber Command, if it's not familiar to many of you, it is the newest military command. It was founded in 2010. It's our newest military command. It has 5,000 cybersecurity people, 62 teams that are tasked with offensive cyber warfare to take attacks back to the enemy. Now, they have not been unleashed so far because they haven't been told to do so. And I think We've been a little reticent because we were so busy making the sanctions, we didn't notice that they were there. That with our friend Kirsten and General Nakasone and the attitude in Congress, I believe that we're going to see some action. I really do. Now, I'll close with this. The 9/11 Commission you may know about this, did an updated report in 2014 that said, okay, looking back at 9/11, what that we've learned has been accomplished? Is there anything new? What has been the progress? And they wrote another report. And they made this comment, I thought it was particularly suitable. This comment about cyber was, one lesson from 9/11 is that we didn't awaken to the gravity of the terrorist threat until it was too late. We must not repeat that threat in the cyber realm. And if you listen to what I've said tonight, is we have essentially been doing exactly what they said. We have been waiting until it's too late. And I feel like finally, with the right people in place, the right attitudes in Congress, that there is a chance. I'll be back in front of you in a year. There is a chance that we are going to see some progress. I can never guarantee that the government will do anything, for sure, but I have really, for the first time, I'm very honest about this. For the first time, I see some indications that we are going to go on the offense, and it is high time to do so.